So now both students move in. They are enjoying themselves, and your key focus as the platform owner is to monetize them, automations wise. Assuming they both refuse to give their data for some reason or another, you're still a payoff short. So you need to collect on that before you focus on the next payoff. So, first things first, get that data consent. By now, you've learned a bit about Millie and Assad from their general services data, such as their Wi Fi usage habits, utilities usage, building and room access habits, and so on. So perhaps from that data, you can entice them to consent to their behavioral data usage. And some of this enticement might dig into the rental revenue in the form of discounts. So this means, as the platform owner, you're playing two games now, one versus the tenant in terms of getting them to consent to the use of the behavioral data and use automations to the point where their usage exceeds free credits and you actually start monetizing them by billing them for usage above the free credits. The other game is against the party actually paying the rental on behalf of the student. In Millie's case, that's the company sponsoring her, and in Assad's case, that's his parents. If there's a student who is waiting tables or using their content creation skills to generate income, to pay their way through higher education, and they wind up in your building, they would be both the tenant as well as the financier. So you have to make a note of this profile element as a filter in terms of these types of incentives and how to use them as leverage to get to certain outcomes. Now, you have to bear in mind that if you're using up to 10% of the rental, you are dipping into the property manager's kitty in order to gamble and make a bet that you can use what you took from the honeypot to not only guarantee revenue from the same source beyond the current contract period, but to kickstart the generation of a secondary source of revenue. You, as the platform owner, are actually creating fertile ground for potential leakage risk. So you'll have to manage that risk as you go along. So, in the case of Millie and Assad, it's all good and well that they get to the point where they can't imagine leaving the building for the rest of the period of their studies. But if the party who is actually paying for them isn't convinced, there's a high likelihood you won't get the outcome that you want. One way to create this undesirable situation is to assume that once you've created stickiness on the part of the tenant, you can charge them more, rental wise, for the next contract period. The funding party might find your rental increase unpalatable and pull the plug on your little plan, despite the students' protests. This is not a ball you want to kick into the future and hope for the best. You have to maneuver within the contract deal structure with the property manager to offset and balance the dipping of the 10% of the rental. One way to manage this situation is to anticipate this risk upfront and include something in the deal terms that will give you a bit more wiggle room to maneuver. This something could be a performance deal in your favor as the platform owner that states that should you reach a certain percentage of lease renewals, particularly for the subset of tenants with no defaults that actively use your automations platform, you get a certain bonus. This then gives you a bit more wiggle room to play around with credits and discounts without creating leakage for the property manager. You just have to manage this risk for yourself, and there are a number of tools you can use to do that. Once the tenant is on your platform, you give them free credits along with some perks to inspire actual usage of the platform, and the drive for stickiness begins. Now, the student can decide to quit your platform anytime or pause usage once the free credits have run out. But by this point, the platform has already become a strong part of their life, so it will be very hard to quit. This puts them in a weakly dominant position against you, because whatever resolve they may have to not use the platform will wane with every profile driven, that is, personalized, offer you entice them with. 10% of the rental is not a small amount of money, so you have a lot of room, perks wise, to keep enticing them to use the platform. Furthermore, students are the professionals of the future, so partnership opportunities are not hard to come by. A perk, such as giving the student an X amount of money that can only be deposited at Bank Y's account on their behalf, thus forcing the student to open an account with Bank Y or actively use their existing account with Bank Y, should give you some commission from Bank Y. So that portion of the 10% you used to set up the perk is now offset by the partnership commission you got from Bank Y. You also have to consider that once tenants are on your automation platform, you can use AI to anticipate and mitigate risk. For example, Millie being sponsored does not mean she is 100% risk free rental default wise. She could still lose her sponsor by perhaps falling pregnant and flunking out, developing an online gaming addiction and failing her courses and flunking out, deciding to throw caution to the wind, drop out of school and pursue that hip hop career, and so on. Furthermore, Assad can take up campus student activism as a hobby, advocating for the rights of minority students to not be profiled by campus security, for example, or helping college sports students navigate the legalities of college football and watch out for dodgy agents and their extortive contracts, ending up on the news as a key figure in student activism and someone to watch as a potential influential legal mind of the future. This might earn him sponsorship by one of the top law firms in the country. And suddenly, that rental default risk you were worried about becomes highly minimized. In fact, instead of running the risk of tenant default, you now even gain intangible benefits such as good PR for buildings run by this property manager. Suddenly, every other building manager in town wants to run your platform. Your deal structure with your current clients triple in value if they want exclusivity, and your patents increase in value. An amazing position to be in. You'll have to use your data to do some prediction and next best action activities to manage the risk. Pick up study patterns, online class and tutoring attendance patterns, time spent on recreational activities versus time spent on studies. How much time does Midi actually spend on online gaming versus the time she spends on researching the best way to go about her Optimus Prime assignment? Is Assad more invested in what happens next on his favorite telenovelas than he is in developing his case law knowledge? Are the nudges your platform gives them as a next best action initiative working? You'll notice the Nash equilibrium vibes coming through here. Because if they lose in their studies, i.e., flunk out, you lose. If they win, you win. If you lose, i.e., the nudges your platform gives them are not usable or effective, they lose. You have to closely manage your risk. It's worthwhile to mention here that it's probably a great idea to revisit our revenue assurance course, where the path from potential leakage identification to risk mitigation strategizing is mapped seamlessly process wise. Now, as you endeavor to monetize the student for automations, you have to have some idea about where these funds within the student's income and spending profile are going to be coming from. Billing the student funding party for automations used outside of free credits might be the fastest way to guarantee that the tenant doesn't renew at the end of the current lease period. How is this conversation going to pan out between Assad and his parents? Assad, you have 10 fingers. You just needed one to switch off or change the air conditioning temperature so we wouldn't be billed extra for your rental. This before they fire up an email to the property manager to quote, remove all the robots from our son's room because we don't intend on paying for them. You can't really blame them. There are two types of people: one who sees it pointless to buy a luxury car unless it has a sunroof, and the other who feels the sun is intelligent enough to find its way into their car and doesn't need an expensive and unnecessary designated entrance. Automation credits should be a separate account that the student has to top up themselves and not billed as a postpaid offer. Here's the upside in this situation though. If Millie is spending all her time and pocket money on online gaming, which might somewhat compromise her studies, using AI automations via next best action suggestions to redirect Millie to minimize online gaming and focus more on her studies, perhaps by using AI to convert her study material or course literature into learning processes that mimic the models in her favorite online games, thus making spending time on her studies feel like she's playing some of her favorite online games, then you've now created a source of funding to pay for these automations. The more you use AI to generate gaming models out of her study materials, the more she would engage her study material. The more she engages her study material, the less online games she plays. The less online games she plays, the less money she spends on them. The more reliant she becomes on these robotics learning material to gaming generative AI automations, then likely she'll redirect her pocket money to purchasing more automations credits. Come lease renewal, she's already attached to her room, mostly due to the convenience and value driven automations, so renewal is almost guaranteed. You don't have to dispense perks to get her to give you behavioral data usage consent. She will happily consent. You have guaranteed rental because she retained her sponsorship due to the good grades your AI automations have helped her get. You have a projection of her automation spend per month, and you can use these as leverage for better deal terms with the property manager or owner. So you're good. You're really good. The same goes for Assad. If your automations platform turns key case law cases into AI generated telenovelas, full on with dramatic human looking characters, Spanish audio, and English subtitles, you might get into those straight A's that he needs to land an internship at a good law firm during the summer that could turn into a full on sponsorship. Everybody does what they need to do to get the best out of the situation. Everybody wins. If the party financing the student forces the student to move out of the building, they risk negatively impacting the student's great academic performance. No sponsor or parent wants to spend money on the student only for them to flunk out or not perform the best they know they could academically. You wouldn't deviate from the formula at the risk of losing a good tenant and revenue that comes with it. A classic Nash equilibrium.